Welcome back to The Deep Dive, the show where we take a monumental stack of research notes and foundational texts and distill the absolute essence so you can walk away well-informed without the information overload headache.
Our mission today is a big one.
It is truly ambitious. We are diving deep into the very core arguments of the father of sociobiology, E.O. Wilson, specifically exploring the foundational chapters on social evolution. Chapters 3, 4, and 5 from his landmark 1975 work, Sociobiology, the new synthesis.
That's right. And you have to remember, when Wilson wrote this, his goal was nothing short of codifying sociobiology as a rigorous branch of evolutionary biology.
Right, on par with the heavy hitters.
Exactly, like molecular biology or developmental biology. This isn't just about describing what animals do. It's about creating a unified predictive science for all social systems.
And the scale of that unifying goal is just breathtaking. I mean, the dream is to use the same quantitative theory, the same parameters, to analyze vastly different societies.
Yeah, the same set of rules.
The same rules, the same equations to look at a termite colony, which is just rigidly genetically pre-programmed right next to a super flexible, learned society of rhesus metacs.
And the goal is to use those shared rules to gain insight into all social evolution, including, eventually our own.
It's a beautifully structured intellectual framework. He lays out this clear hierarchy, right?
A very clear sequence. You start with evolutionary studies, which that informs ecology. Ecology, in turn, gives you the parameters you need, the demographic, the environmental stuff for population biology.
And it's that population biology that's the key.
That is the absolute key. It's the mathematics of life, death, and genes, and it's what directly underpins sociobiology. Sociobiology then sort of absorbs fields like ethology and comparative psychology and connects them back to the underlying biology.
Okay, so let's unpack this for everyone listening. This deep dive is really about the heart of that whole sequence, moving from the ecology to the population math, and finally to how selection actually works. We're asking about the deep demographic and genetic rules, what Wilson calls the ultimate causation, that dictate why societies form the way they do, how we can quantify them, and then the big one, how self-sacrificing behavior can possibly exist.
Precisely. We're working from the central idea that social organization is, to a large extent, predictable if you just know the right parameters.
But before we get into the deep math, we should probably do a quick recap. How do small differences lead to these huge social changes?
Yes, the multiplier effect and behavioral scaling. We have to touch on those. They're foundational.
The multiplier effect is key. It's like the butterfly effect for social evolution.
It is. And the best example to really get your head around it is the comparison between two very, very close baboon species, the olive baboon and the Hamadryas baboon.
They're so close they can interbreed, right?
That they can, but their societies are radically different. And the key behavioral difference is actually pretty subtle. It's that the Hamadryas male has this proprietary permanent attitude toward his females. He forms these lifelong one-male units.
Whereas the olive baboon male,
He only really tries to appropriate females when they're in estrus. It's a temporary thing.
so just a slight difference in that proprietary behavior, a tiny genetic shift in male-female bonding gets amplified.
Massively amplified. In the olive baboon, you get these flexible, large, multi-male troops. But in the Hamadryas, that little proprietary difference means males are constantly herding and aggressively policing their females.
Which results in those small, stable, one-male units.
Right, which only clump together into huge herds for safety when they're sleeping. So that small input change completely dictates troop size, how males relate to each other, even how they use their habitat.
And that amplification leads right into the other concept, behavioral scaling.
Exactly. Social organization isn't fixed. It's labile. It can change. Behaviors like aggression or territoriality, they're genetically programmed to work on a scale.
So they shift their intensity based on what's going on in the environment.
You have things like population density, food availability, and so on.
So the animals aren't just reacting randomly, they have a pre-programmed range of responses.
That's the critical insight. With vervet monkeys, for example, their threshold for a fight might be really high at low densities, but then as the population grows, that threshold drops. And at super high densities, the whole system might just break down into chaos.
And selection isn't fixing one point on that scale, like always be aggressive.
No, selection is fixing the entire scale of possible responses. The whole dynamic range is the trait that's being adapted to fit the environment.
That dynamic calibration is a perfect setup. So now we're diving into Chapter 3, which asks, what forces orchestrate those scales and parameters in the first place? What are the deep, non-negotiable determinants?
And this is where it gets really interesting. Wilson splits these prime movers into two big categories: phylogenetic inertia and ecological pressure.
Let's start with phylogenetic inertia. It's maybe the most fundamental constraint of all.
It is. It's essentially the resistance to evolutionary change. It's the historical baggage or the deep internal wiring that limits what a species can do socially.
High inertia means it's really constrained. Low inertia means it's flexible or labile.
Exactly. And some of these constraints are just, breathtakingly fundamental. The clearest example of an internal constraint is haplodiploidy. This isn't just a quirky fact about ants, it's a profound evolutionary bias.
Explain that for us.
So in Hymenoptera, that's ants, bees, and wasps, the genetic system is weird. Males are haploid, meaning they have one set of chromosomes, and females are diploid with two sets.
And this creates an asymmetry in relatedness.
A huge one. Because a female gets all of her father's genes, any daughter she produces will share an average of 75% of their genes with their sisters, but a mother only shares 50% with her own daughter.
Wait, 75% relatedness to your sister? That's higher than your relatedness to your own kid.
Precisely. From a gene's eye view, this system predisposes these insects toward eusociality, the star worker caste.
It literally makes more evolutionary sense to help your sister, the queen's new daughter, than to have your own offspring.
It's a better investment for propagating your own genes. The genetic system itself sets the stage for massive altruism. It's a powerful constraint and a pre-adaptation all in one.
Inertia also applies to just the basic body plan, right? Like in sponges.
Yeah, lower invertebrates like sponges or bryozoans often reproduce by asexual budding. So the groups they form are just genetically identical clones.
So if one sacrifices itself, it's not really altruism in the way we think of it.
Not at all. It's more like one of your skin cells dying to protect your body. The primitive body plan just makes cooperative evolution, well, trivial.
But inertia isn't always a helpful predisposition. Sometimes it's just an obsolete system, and the spotted hyena is the prime example here.
It's a great example. They're incredibly efficient pack hunters, but their social structure, with these fixed specific scent marking sites and immobile dependent cubs, it still reflects a territorial lifestyle. A lifestyle adapted for stable, resource-rich places like the Ngorongoro crater.
And what happens when they move to the Serengeti, where the food is scarce and they have to be nomadic?
They're stuck. They're forced to retain those obsolete constraints. They still use the scent marks and have to haul enormous amounts of food back to these fixed den sites, even though a fully nomadic lifestyle would be way more efficient.
So they're paying a constant energy tax.
A huge one. All because they're constrained by their phylogenetic history. It's like running yesterday's software on today's unforgiving hardware.
Okay, so those are the deep internal constraints, but external factors can also constrain things through what Wilson calls pre-adaptation, like the desert iguana.
Yes, the desert iguana is just physiologically locked into this tiny range of temperatures. For full activity, it needs to be at least 38.5 degrees Celsius, but if it hits 43 degrees, it's fatal.
So its entire life is dictated by that narrow thermal window.
Everything. Its basic physiology dictates everything. It has to cram all its complex behaviors, foraging, defending territory, mating rituals, social signaling to these tiny little time habitat envelopes dictated by just a few degrees of temperature.
The physical environment is the ultimate non-negotiable boss.
And you see this on a huge scale when you look at the constraints from the tropic ladder and the idea of ecological efficiency. This all comes down to the famous 10% rule.
Right, the core ecological principle that only about 10% of the energy from one trophic level makes it to the next.
And that 90% loss at every step is just devastating as you go up the chain. Food chains rarely get past 4 or 5 links.
So if you're a top carnivore, a wolf, or a killer whale, you're using a tiny fraction of the original energy from plants.
A minuscule fraction,
Right.
maybe 0.00001%. So you have to be incredibly sparse and have these enormous home ranges, hundreds or thousands of square kilometers, just to get enough calories to survive.
And that scarcity forces an evolutionary choice.
It does. A lone tiger, which can handle prey that's smaller relative to its size, can stay solitary. But for a wolf or a killer whale to get enough calories from huge, difficult prey like a moose or a bison or a large whale sociality becomes mandatory.
It's the only way to meet the energy demands.
Cooperation isn't a luxury for them. It's a thermodynamic necessity driven by the inefficiency of the food chain.
Okay, so if those are the constraints that sort of channel things towards sociality, what are the forces pushing against it, the antisocial factors?
Well, in insects, the main one is the reproductivity effect. As a colony gets bigger, the rate of new individual production per member actually goes down.
You hit a point of diminishing returns.
You do. The colony only keeps going if that larger size gives it a significantly higher chance of survival, if it's a better defender or competitor than the smaller colonies.
So cooperation is always fighting this uphill battle against energetic inefficiency. What about for mammals?
For mammals, the number one antisocial factor is chronic food shortage. If your food is patchy, unpredictable, or you have to be opportunistic, groups are just too expensive to maintain all year.
Like the coyote.
Perfect example. The male coyotes only join the female and juvenile bands when food is super abundant and it's time to mate. As soon as resources get tight again, the females actively drive them away.
The cost of carrying a big, non-productive male is just too high when calories are scarce.
Exactly. Or think about the moose, which is generally solitary. Its whole strategy is opportunistic grazing wherever it can find food. It just can't afford the cost of sustained vigilance or coordinated movement that a permanent social group requires. Solitude is just the most profitable feeding strategy.
So we've covered the limitations from history and energy inertia. Now we move to the second prime mover, ecological pressure. These are the active forces that induce social organization.
And the most frequent driver he identifies by far is defense against predators.
The benefits of group defense are just so clear. The first one is simple: increased detection.
Right. Think of ground squirrels or prairie dogs. One squirrel on its own has a low chance of spotting a hawk, but a whole town of them has such high detection efficiency with these waves of alarm calls that it becomes almost impossible for a predator to get close without being seen.
And it moves from just passive detection to active evasion maneuvers, like a huge starling flock, a murmuration.
Yeah, when a hawk is above them, they pull into this incredibly dense formation. It's a technique called tightening.
Why do they do that?
Because that dense formation makes the hawk's high-speed dive incredibly dangerous for the hawk. It risks colliding with a bird that isn't its target. So it forces the predator to slow down or just give up. It's a group-level defense that lowers individual risk by raising the risk for the predator.
But safety in numbers isn't just about detection or maneuvering. It can be a defense in time, predator saturation, or the Darling effect.
This is a really remarkable concept. It's all about synchronizing reproductive events to completely overwhelm the predator's ability to eat the prey.
The wild beasts are the classic example.
Absolutely. They don't just calve year-round. The vast majority of births happen in this narrow 2 to 3 week window.
And the result is this short, massive explosion of millions of vulnerable calves.
Right. Any single female who calves too early or too late is basically serving her offspring up on a platter to hungry predators. But by calving right in the middle of that synchronous explosion, the whole population is safer because the local predators just physically cannot eat all the young that are available.
So the middle of the crowd in time is the safest place to be.
It is. And that's kind of the temporal version of the selfish herd where you try to get to the middle of the crowd in space, like in a fish school.
Right. The fish benefit just because the group is harder to find in the first place, and once it is found, it's just too big for the predator to handle.
Yeah, the larger the school, the lower the detection frequency for any one fish. And as long as the school size is bigger than the number of prey the predator can eat in one go, some members are guaranteed to get away.
And you see these same defensive strategies popping up all over the evolutionary tree. Group defenses in arthropods, for example.
Like those brightly colored aposematic caterpillars, they're much more protected by being conspicuous as a group than they would be alone.
And the owlfly larvae are an even more dramatic example.
Oh, they're amazing. Alone, they're just soft-bodied and easy to eat, but they cluster together into this bristling, snapping mass of jaws.
So their collective defense transforms them from easy prey into a tiny, formidable unit.
It's a clear evolutionary convergence with, vertebrate herd tactics.
In invertebrates, defense is often what drives the evolution of multi-male groups. The more terrestrial a primate is, the less cover it has, the larger its group size tends to be.
And the more specialized its males become for coordinated defense, including things like actively mobbing predators.
So defense leads naturally to the next driver, increased competitive ability.
It does. Aggregations just win against individuals when it comes to resources. You see it with elk gangs driving solitary animals from salt licks, or in rhesus monkeys, where fights over food are almost always won by the bigger troop.
The energy you spend on competition is less than the energy you gain from winning as a group.
Right. And in social insects, this competition is just fierce and colony-wide. Ant and termite colonies compete intensely for foraging space, which favors large, well-organized groups that can mobilize soldiers.
The third big driver is increased feeding efficiency. This starts with something simple, like imitative foraging.
Yeah, one bird just follows another to a food source, but it scales up quickly. Starlings use the pooled knowledge of the whole flock to find unpredictable food patches.
Or manga bees, whose social structure actually changes depending on the food.
Exactly. When they're feeding on big, single fruits, a valuable, defensible resource, they have way more aggressive interactions than when the food is spread out. The social structure is calibrated to the economics of the food.
And this brings us to Horn's principle, which is this really elegant way to quantify the relationship between how food is distributed and how a society is structured.
Horn's principle is a key insight. It basically suggests that if food is evenly distributed and easy to defend, you're going to see solitary living and exclusive territories.
Why is that?
Because the cost of defending your patch is less than the cost of having to share all that widely available food. It's just more economical to be alone.
And the opposite.
If the food is unpredictable and patchy like schools of fish or shifting patches of grain, that favors colonial living and group foraging. The group uses its pooled knowledge to find these moving resources, which maximizes the chance for any one individual to get a meal, even if they have to share it in the end.
That's why gulls that hunt fish are colonial, while a bird eating evenly spread insects might be fiercely territorial.
Precisely. And the peak of this feeding efficiency is, of course, cooperative foraging, which requires diversified behavior, complex communication, and often real altruistic restraint.
This is what you need to take down prey that's just too big or too fast for one individual.
Think of wolves, where they need these coordinated maneuvers to drive large prey into a bad spot, or killer whales, who showed just stunning levels of coordination.
How sophisticated are we talking?
I mean, incredibly sophisticated. Some will circle a school of porpoises to keep them contained, while others charge in and feed, and then they'll switch roles. When they attack large whales, they coordinate to grab fins, and they'll even work together to pry open the jaw to get at the tongue. That requires complex, diversified roles.
Even ants do this with their recruitment signals.
Right, chemical alarm pheromones that basically scream, "Help me, and here's where the food is," so they can overpower a large food item.
And some ants take it even a step further with tandem running.
Yeah, that's a true teacher-learner process. One worker literally guides another with physical contact, stopping and starting to communicate the exact path, not just laying a vague chemical trail.
And the last big ecological pressure is increased reproductive efficiency.
Aggregating just minimizes predation when you're most vulnerable during reproduction. Insect mating swarms are a good example. But the green sea turtle gives us a really physical example of this required sociality.
The mass hatching event.
Yes. If you rebury the hatchlings one by one, only about a quarter of them even make it to the surface. But in groups of 4 or more, they have almost perfect emergence.
Why?
It's a witless division of labor. Their mass digging and squirming just collectively pushes the whole group up to the surface. It's a group effort from the moment they hatch. Otherwise, individual survival is basically zero. The environment selects for them all to hatch together.
So if Chapter 3 was about the drivers, Chapter 4 is where we get the mathematical tools, the predictive stoichiometry, as Wilson calls it, to analyze the results.
Exactly. This chapter grounds social traits in population genetics and demography. We're moving from observing the constraints to the rigor of prediction.
Okay, let's start with the genetic foundations. Drift, flow, and selection.
First up is genetic drift. This is just a change in gene frequencies because of pure chance or sampling error. It's most powerful in really small populations, say 100 individuals or less.
And this can happen through a bottleneck effect, where a population gets temporarily tiny.
Right, or the founder effect. This one is really powerful. When a new population is started by just a few individuals, they only carry a fraction of the genetic variability of the parent population.
So by pure chance, the new population can be very different.
Very different. And for a social species, if that little founding group happens to have a higher than average frequency of, say, an altruistic gene, drift can actually help that gene get established.
So drift can sometimes help sociality. Then you have gene flow or migration, which does the opposite.
Right. It counteracts drift and makes populations more similar. The equation Wilson gives is QD, 1 Miller plus mu beta. It looks complicated, but the idea is simple.
Break it down for us.
Well, QD is the gene frequency in population A, QD is the frequency in population B, and BOE is the rate of immigration from B into A. The key insight is that even a moderate immigration rate, a moderate M, can cause a really significant rapid change in the gene frequency of the population it's entering.
And what does that mean for social evolution?
It means the faster genes flow between populations, the harder it is for complex, locally adapted social behaviors, like altruism, to evolve.
Why is that?
Because if you're a self-sacrificing altruist, your genes need to stick around and benefit your local relatives. If your relatives are constantly being diluted by selfish immigrants from other places, that altruistic behavior just can't get a foothold. So gene flow is often an antisocial force.
And the third force is selection itself, and the speed of selection is defined with the equation $1 is H2S decile.
Right. So R is the response to selection, how fast the trait evolves. S is the selection intensity, how hard nature is pushing. And two-cell texture is the heritability, basically how much of the variation in the trait is actually due to genetics.
So if a social behavior, like cooperation, has high heritability and the environment is putting strong pressure on it, that social structure can change really fast, evolutionarily speaking.
But if the behavior is mostly learned, with low heritability, evolution is going to be slow no matter how intense the pressure is.
This brings us to the concepts that are absolutely vital for understanding social traits: inbreeding and kinship.
Yes. The inbreeding coefficient, S, is the probability that the two alleles an organism has are identical because they came from a common ancestor.
And the coefficient of relationship, our Hamilton's famous coefficient, is the fraction of genes that two individuals share by descent.
This is what lets us put a number on relatedness.
Exactly. zero point 0.5 for a full sibling, 0.25 for a half sibling, and so on. This is the mathematical bedrock you need to understand the costs and benefits of altruism.
And we can connect that relatedness to geography with Malakoff's law.
Right, which just states that the probability of two individuals sharing genes by descent decreases exponentially the farther apart they live. 5SD is ABD.
The key parameter there is B, which is about dispersal. So what's the social consequence if a population has a low dispersal rate? When a population has high viscosity, meaning low dispersal, a small b's, the kinship, the R value among neighbors, is really high. And this is crucial. It means that altruistic acts you perform for your neighbors are much more likely to be directed at your relatives.
So it makes altruism much more profitable from a gene's perspective.
Way more profitable. High viscosity significantly increases the chances for social altruism to evolve.
Okay, moving to the ecological side. Chapter 4 grounds all this in population growth models and density dependence.
Right, the idea that something pushes a population's growth rate down as it approaches its carrying capacity. K. Wilson identifies 3 general curves for how this can happen, shown in figure 411.
Curve A is the fine control model.
Yeah, that's just a smooth, decelerating growth rate as you get close to K. It's what you'd expect in non-social populations where competition is subtle.
Curve B shows abrupt control.
This is where the population grows at its maximum rate until it's right up against K and then it just crashes. This is typical of systems with rigid thresholds, like a species with a fixed number of territories.
And curve C is the most important one for sociobiology, the critical mass model.
It is. Here, the growth rate is actually low at very low densities. It rises as the group gets bigger because the social benefits like better defense or hunting kick in, and only then does it decline as it hits K.
So this model implies that social species need a minimum number of individuals to even survive, a critical mass.
And the population drops below that threshold, the social benefits collapse, and the population's growth rate goes negative, they head for extinction. Social species are vulnerable to being too small, which isn't a problem for solitary species.
And there's a whole catalog of these density-dependent controls, and a lot of them are behavioral. Emigration is the most common one.
Yeah, and it's almost always the juveniles and subordinates who are forced out the losers in the local competition. This could be a mechanical thing like hydras floating away or something incredibly profound, like the locust phase change.
The locusts are unbelievable. The crowding itself triggers this multi-generational shift from a solitary phase to a gregarious phase.
It's a radical physiological change. They get darker, more slender, with longer wings. They literally become superior flying machines that are perfectly adapted for mass, long-distance migration. The social signal crowding triggers a complete redesign.
Then you have the dark side of social density, social pathology and stress.
Yeah, all that increased interaction leads to hormonal stress, which suppresses reproduction. Calhoun's behavioral sync experiments with rats showed this. When the normal controls were bypassed, the stress caused this massive social breakdown.
Females stopped building proper nests, infant mortality went through the roof.
The population regulated itself not through starvation, but through social collapse.
And sometimes the regulation is even more direct, like infanticide and cannibalism.
In some species, like guppies, adults just stabilize the population by eating the excess young. In social insects, termites are almost entirely cannibalistic. They eat their dead and injured to recycle nutrients. It's brutal, but it's an effective way to regulate the colony size and resources.
And the final control is competition, which Wilson splits into scramble and contest.
Scramble is just exploitative. Whoever gets to the resource first wins. Contest competition is direct interaction fighting, signaling, dominance hierarchies. And social organization is fundamentally based on contest competition.
Okay, so the final set of quantitative tools in this chapter is life histories. This is all summarized in life tables.
Right, with the survivorship schedule, $6, and the fertility schedule, $6.
The survivorship schedule tells you what proportion of individuals survive to a certain age, X. And there are three basic curves.
Type I is high survival until old age, like humans in developed nations. Type 2 is a constant risk of death your whole life, like a straight line down on a log plot.
And type 3 is the most common in nature.
By far. That's massive early mortality that levels off later. It's what you see in species that have tons of offspring, but invest very little in each one, like most insects. The shape of that curve dictates the entire reproductive strategy.
And you combine this with the fertility schedule, bisexuals, to figure out the total number of offspring an individual has in a lifetime.
But the most crucial concept here for social evolution is reproductive value, or 50s.
What is that exactly?
It's the expected contribution of an individual of age X to the future population. It's a measure of an organism's future potential.
I like to think of it as the organism's stock price. It starts low, rises, and then peaks right when an organism hits reproductive maturity.
It's a perfect analogy. And it's so predictive because selection acts to preserve individuals when their stock price is highest. Organisms evolve to take risks or disperse right at the time of their maximum reproductive value.
Which is why it's usually the young adults who are the most common dispersers.
Exactly. They've reached maturity but haven't reproduced much yet, so their potential contribution to the next generation is at its absolute peak.
We can also quantify the force of selection at different ages using selection intensity.
Right. How much does a change in mortality or fertility at a specific age change the whole population's growth rate? For mortality, selection against it is highest right near conception and then decreases.
So evolution wants to push mortality as early as possible to minimize wasted parental investment.
Exactly. And the opposite is true for fertility. The selection intensity for fertility decreases with age. So the relentless evolutionary pressure is always to reproduce sooner, not later.
But so many social species like chimps, elephants, humans, they don't reproduce for years after they're mature. What's stopping that relentless push?
Counteracting social factors. A male baboon might need years to get big enough to win fights and get access to mates. Primates and wolves need a long time for socialization and learning before they can successfully raise young or hunt effectively.
So the timing of reproduction in these species is a compromise.
It's a compromise dictated by the social necessity of being big enough or smart enough or experienced enough to win in that contest competition.
Which leads us perfectly to the big dichotomy in evolutionary strategy,
Yeah.
R and K selection.
Right. This explains why some species are like mice and others are like elephants. The R strategist is the opportunist. It favors a high rate of increase, R.
They're adapted to unpredictable, short-lived habitats.
Weedy species, fugitive species. Their strategy is simple: reproduce fast, disperse widely, and hope you find a vacant spot before you crash.
And the K strategist is the opposite. They favor maximizing their population at the carrying capacity K.
They're adapted to stable, crowded habitats, long-lived trees, large mammals. Their strategy is all about being a good competitor. Low birth rate, long life, high investment in each offspring.
Figure 419 shows this trade-off graphically. In an unstable environment where the population is usually low, the one with the highest core wins.
But in a stable, crowded environment near K, the genotype with the highest K wins, even if its growth rate is slower. An elephant outcompetes a mouse in a stable forest.
So what does this mean for social structure, the Lydekker-Eisenberg principle?
The social implication is huge. Higher forms of social evolution are strongly favored by K selection. Stability promotes things like land tenure, longer lives, and increased kinship, all the conditions you need for complex social bonds and high parental investment.
So we've covered the physics and the math. Now we turn to the ultimate evolutionary conflict, altruism. This is the great riddle of sociobiology.
It is. How can self-sacrificing behavior possibly evolve if individual selection always favors the selfish gene?
And the answer requires looking beyond the individual to selection operating at higher levels.
First, we have to be really precise about what we mean. Kin selection is selection that affects members of the same family group. It operates on an individual in a way that affects the frequency of genes they share with their relatives.
And then there's interdemic selection or group selection.
This is selection that operates on an entire breeding population, a deme as a single unit. Demes with more altruists might survive better or send out more colonists than demes with fewer altruists.
And we classify the behaviors based on fitness. Altruism is increasing someone else's fitness at a cost to your own.
Like a sterile worker bee, selfishness is the opposite. And the trickiest one to prove is spite.
That's reducing someone else's fitness while gaining nothing or even hurting yourself.
It's very hard to prove evolutionarily, but you see physical examples, like a male bowerbird destroying a neighbor's bower. But even that might be secretly selfish if it helps him get the female later.
The theoretical difficulty of pure group selection is just massive, right?
It is. The rate of group extinction has to be fast enough to counteract its relentless individual selection that favors selfish traits within the group.
Because the moment you have an altruistic group, the selfish individual inside that group will always reproduce a little faster, and that selfish gene should just spread and destroy the group's advantage from the inside out.
Exactly. So theoreticians like Levins and Borman-Levitt had to build these models to find the specific parameter window where altruism could evolve through this interdemic selection.
And what are the conditions for that window?
Well, first, extinction rates have to be high. And island biogeography studies show that rates are easily within the required range. But second, and this is the crucial part, the extinction function has to decline steeply as the frequency of the altruist gene goes up.
Why does it have to be so steep?
Because if having more altruists only makes your group slightly less likely to go extinct, it's not enough to overcome that selfish advantage inside the group. The collective benefit from altruism has to be strongly, disproportionately protective of the whole group.
And what was the general result from these really strict models?
That pure interdemic selection, acting alone, is usually only strong enough to maintain the state of polymorphism, a mix of altruists and non-altruists. It's rarely powerful enough to make the altruist gene take over completely.
That sounds pretty pessimistic for group cooperation. Is there a more feasible model?
Yes, the segregation and mixing model is more realistic. It suggests that altruists significantly increase the absolute growth rate of their population when it's isolated.
So even if the altruists are technically less fit than the selfish individuals within their own little group,
Which is the definition of altruism.
the whole group just grows so much larger because of their cooperation.
Precisely. They're less fit per capita, but they boost the group's total biomass and survival. So if that bigger, more successful group later sends out colonists, the altruist gene increases in frequency across the whole metapopulation just because their group produced more total offspring. They win by population scale, not by individual competition.
Okay, let's apply this to some real behaviors. The most extreme case: thwarting predators and outright self-sacrifice.
In social insects, you see clear-cut altruism that evolves through kin selection at the family level. Soldier castes and termites and ants put themselves in the most dangerous positions. And the most dramatic example is the honeybee worker's barbed sting.
A suicide device.
It is a deliberate suicide device adapted for vertebrates. When the sting pulls free, it rips out part of the bee's insides, killing her.
Yeah.
This is selection acting purely at the colony level. The gene is preserved by saving the queen and the colony, even if the individual worker dies.
That level of suicide is rare in vertebrates, but self-sacrifice still happens, like dominant male baboons covering the retreat.
And that's almost always explained by the kin selection hypothesis. That dominant male baboon is probably the father or a close relative of the ones he's defending. The cost of defense is offset by the genetic gain of saving his kin.
Now for the famous riddle of warning calls in birds. A small bird sees a hawk and lets out that high-pitched, reedy whistle that's designed to be hard to locate. Why risk it?
Well, there are a few competing ideas. Hypothesis 3 is kin selection. The call protects your nearby relatives, so you're saving the genes you share with them. The risk to you is offset by that gain in inclusive fitness.
But hypothesis 4 suggests it's not altruism at all, it's just individual selection.
Exactly. The call might actually be a signal to the predator saying, I see you and I'm healthy and I can escape.
So the hawk, knowing it's been spotted, is less likely to even bother trying to attack.
Right. It might discourage the predator from even staying in the neighborhood. So the caller might actually be increasing its own survival rate. The ambiguity shows how hard it is to separate true altruism from complex, self-serving behaviors.
Okay, moving to cooperative breeding. The wild turkey brotherhoods are a fantastic quantified example of kin selection.
Oh, they're magnificent. In wild turkeys, subordinate males will help their dominant brothers in these fierce mating competitions by displaying together. But when it's time to mate, the subordinate males just step aside.
They don't reproduce directly at all.
But by ensuring the reproductive success of a close relative, they maximize their inclusive fitness, the total success of all the genes they share. The payoff is high enough to justify zero personal reproduction.
And finally, food sharing, the core of sociality.
In social insects, food sharing through regurgitation or trophallaxis creates this communal stomach.
And it's not just about nutrients, it transmits pheromones, telling every worker about the nutritional state of the whole colony.
And the absolute peak of this food-related altruism is in honeybees. If they're fed only sugar water, they will literally metabolize their own body tissues to produce protein to feed the larvae.
Which shortens their own lives.
Profoundly. This kind of self-sacrifice is only possible because selection is acting on the colony as a single, highly integrated superorganism, a family unit, where the individual worker's life is secondary to the colony's survival.
We have journeyed through the quantitative foundations of sociobiology.
We have. We started with the prime movers in Chapter 3, seeing how external pressures like predation and internal constraints like haplodiploidy dictate the need for sociality.
We then moved to the quantitative principles in Chapter 4, which gave us the tools, concepts like the coefficient of relationship, the critical mass and density curves, and reproductive value, fuxus that let us predict which life strategy is favored.
And finally, we looked at altruism in Chapter 5, where the power of kin selection provides the mechanism for these incredibly complex behaviors, even suicidal ones. And we saw how the tough requirements of group selection often only lead to a mix of altruists and selfish types, not a full takeover.
The ultimate goal, Wilson's whole drive, is to be able to use this knowledge of demography and genetics to model and predict specific features of a society. Its group size, its division of labor, its communication. We've seen that social behavior isn't a fixed thing, but this dynamic, programmed scale that's constantly being calibrated.
So what does this foundational framework mean for you, the highly complex social learner listening right now? We've established that biological sociality is a costly strategy. It's only favored under very specific conditions: high kinship, intense resource patchiness, or severe, unavoidable predation.
Which brings us to our final thought for you to chew on. Modern human societies are organized with vast numbers of loosely joined, often genetically unrelated individuals spread over huge distances with incredible levels of gene flow and mobility. Given the evolutionary rules we've discussed, rules that favor sociality only under high kinship or tight environmental constraints, we have to ask, what unmeasured modern environmental or social pressures do you think are currently pushing our social behavior along an unseen evolutionary scale?
Are our stable, globalized systems causing us to maximize our competitive ability as case strategists, promoting long life and high investment?
Or are we being driven toward the opportunistic, rapid life cycles of race selection, constantly adapting to an unpredictable, ever-changing modern social environment?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the very foundations of how life organizes itself.
We hope you enjoyed the journey, and we'll see you next time.